Now, representatives of individual bondholders have just concluded a crunch meeting with the finance minister on the controversies surrounding the domestic debt exchange. The forum, representing some 1.3 million individual bondholders, had outrightly rejected their inclusion and demanded their exemption from this particular exchange. The finance minister insists is voluntary. The individual bondholders argue that the program is one of the harshest debt restructuring measures ever adopted, and when rolled out, it would actually impoverish its members. We will later be joined by some economists and a former finance minister. But first, let's speak to a man who sat in the meeting. Martin Pebu is one of the representatives of those individual bondholders. Mr. Pebu, you're welcome to our front.
Hello, yes, Mr. Acquah. Yes, sir. Thank you.
I hope you are doing well, but first...
Yes, relatively at least. Today is better. It's because the meeting is gone well, yes.
No, so yes, that's what I'm coming to. Run us through how this meeting went and the very issues that were resolved at the end of the day.
Okay, so I like to make the most important points first and then go back to the blow-by-blow account. So the main takeaway from this meeting is that the minister is agreed to set up a technical committee for us to look at the budget and see how to create space so that individual bondholders will be exempt from the program, you say. And so that is a quantum leap. So look at the budget, where can you cut so that individual bondholders will be relieved. That's it. That's the main takeaway. All right. So now let's come to running you through the meeting. Okay, so we went in there at the beginning, 3:30. But naturally, you know, these things usually meetings run into each other, so to speak. So the minister wasn't available at 3:30, and so, but relatively, I mean, I think the starting time wasn't bad. Just about 30 minutes wait time, and then we started. Yeah, so prayer to start, and then the introduction. Then the minister made a statement to the press, and afterwards the press were asked to excuse us so that we could, do the negotiations behind closed door. So the press left, and then we went into the actual negotiations. And so each side, we were asked to state our case. And Senor Hosi led us in that. So he stated the case. And then the finance minister said, other group members could add or subtract. And so Mr. Larry Diage reiterated some of the points. Lawyer Telmatevia also came in. Then, yes, I think these were the ones on our side at the time. Yes. So as we kept making the points, then eventually I also had to make a point. Then we did. And so at the end of it, once I was done, I think the minister had a sense of what we were looking for. And so he just quickly agreed that, okay, you're pushing about this budget, and you say the people of Ghana are looking forward to cuts in the budget so that people can get relief from the program. Okay, then come. Let's set up a committee, and then let's see what can be done. So in terms of being productive, it was very productive. If you look at the time span within which we came to that conclusion, it was very productive. So everything else after the acceptance to set up the committee was just basically, of course, in excitement, we'll pat him on the back and all those things, so that was just the rest of it.
So now, let me understand this clearly. You went into the meeting with specific demands. What were those demands? Did they include setting up this committee to review the budget?
No. So we went there to just go tell him that, no, we think there is enough space in the budget to take care of individual bondholders. That is to say, government should cut down on expenditure. We thought it was a simple message to just give. But he turned around and said, times are hard, blah, blah, blah. But at the end of the day, he sees our point. Okay, so then come and sit down. Let's do the exercise together. So, asking us to come and contribute to the exercise, I think it's good. Participatory democracy is good. We thought we were just going to deliver the message and then he would agree that, okay, I agree. just go, we've given you what you're looking for, end of case. But he's chosen to say, let's go into the technical committee, be involved in the process. So I don't see a negative in it. The most important thing is that we are going to the committee to prove, justify all the things we've said. And of course, we read the figures from the budget. So, you know, the, punchline in this whole debate. When we get up as lay people, we are not economists, but we haven't read it. Of course, we have economists on the team, Senor Husi, David Tete, and the rest. Yes, but I'm making the point that right now, one of the most resonating arguments, the argument that resonates everywhere for us is that, look, then let's cut down on the expenditure, and especially the capital expenditure. So I'm aware some economists don't quite agree, but the larger majority, we think that that's the way to go. And so, having said so, said, okay, come and show, let's just sit down and do it properly. That's it. You say it.
So, what are the modalities for this engagement? Are you to present members? What number are we looking at? When is the engagement starting? And is it now a given that whether or not you find places to cut back in the budget, individual bondholders will be excluded? I think that's the meat of the matter.
Yes, that's my sense of the matter. That's my sense of the matter, that individual bondholders will be excluded. Yes, just come and show where, come and contribute your quota in that, in cutting the budget. Yes, that's how I understood it. Because
yes. This committee that we are talking about, how many people are constituting the committee? When will it start work? And when is it likely to conclude its work? Mindful of the fact that we have up to the end of the month or so to get everybody signing up to this deal, especially those who voluntarily participate in it.
Yeah, so we are starting work tomorrow. Yes, and then we are going to present 3 members. So 2 from our forum, you know, the one I was leading, Individual Bondholders Association.
Yeah, okay.
And the Senior Kosiwa, Individual Bondholders Forum, which we have made. We are to present 2. Yes, we are to present 2 members. And then Dr. Eduanani Enchi's group should present 1 person. So that will be 3. And then we meet the ministry side.
Okay. Well, the question I was asking was more to do with the fact that as we speak, is there a declaration that individual bondholders have been excluded, or it will be after you find space within the budget that the exclusion will happen?
So let's say that after we've concluded, then it will be formally announced. Yes, because today there's not been an announcement that individual bondholders are excluded. Once you haven't had it, it means that let's go and sit down and do it. And then the announcement will be made. Because what is very clear, Mr. Acquah, what is very clear is that we are going into the budget to find space. And as I said, we've made the arguments over and over. You see, the good thing is that when we said, Mr. Finance Minister, respectfully, it's our humble opinion that we should cut. He didn't say no. So we did the analysis. Last year we spent 15 billion on capital expenditure. It wasn't bad. So this year it's going higher. But the risk is that this going higher will involve killing people, blah, blah. You know, all the arguments we've been running so far. So when we're done, he just accepted that, look, okay, you know what, gentlemen, let's get on with it. Let's form a committee. Just come and then help further show. You know, so he's understood. I think that, Raymond, the way he says, it gives an easy landing, yes, for all of us. You know, you go into a negotiation and you don't want to come out making one side look victorious, the other side is lost. No. So there is a certain approach that, you know, we will go through some motions and then finally the announcement will be done. Because you see, the finance minister, by saying, come and join a committee to do all this, you see, he's looking good. You see, sometimes, that's a plain truth. And for us, it's not bad as long as we get the results. Because it's not as if when we went there and made the arguments, you shut them down and said, this is not doable. No. Once it's accepted, it's the same thing we are going into the committee. So, Raymond, like you and I, I've been hearing in the morning, you'll be making the same argument Winston Amwa, the same argument. Kudu Jansen, the same argument. Let's cut down. So that's the same thing we took there. From the public holiday, that was the message we're preaching from last Monday to today, Tuesday. So about how many, 8, 9, or 10 days?
Very well.
That's the argument, and he's
okay.
So
wrapping up on this point, how many days will this committee be sitting, and when is it supposed to conclude this work?
Those ones, I think they all come in there. Once the deadline is 30th, let's work within. I think so.
Okay.
Because, and then he made a point. The assumption is that we'll finish before the 30th, because he said, let's get on quickly with it. There was no need to waste any further time making arguments. Once we went into the budget, and see, we are all talking about the budget, where we are saying, we see this thing can go, we see that thing can go. He says, okay, come join the committee and participate, and then let's get on with it.
I am most grateful to you, Martin Pebu, for joining us this evening and giving us clarity on what happened in that meeting, that crunch meeting between the finance minister and representatives of individual bondholders who are demanded their exclusion. The latest we are hearing, as he actually elucidated right now, is that the finance ministry actually has set up a committee of a sort with representation from this group, the individual bondholders, who, among other things, 3 people, they will join them, review the budget, and see where they can make some, if you like, cuts. These cuts are supposed to ensure that there is enough room to now exclude the individual bondholders. We have been discussing an amount within the zone of some 7 or 8 billion cedis. That is what the individual bondholders are supposed to be having in this particular debt exchange. That conversation is the latest happening on the very plate here. But let me bring in people who understand this better than most people in the Republic of Ghana. Now, I will be joined, and I understand I have been joined, by the economist and former chairman of the National Development Planning Commission, Professor Stephen Adair. I'm also being joined, if I'm lucky enough, by a former finance minister, Mr. Sektepe, to review the latest development and the issues that have surrounded this very controversial debt exchange program, which is required so that we can get a debt sustainability level, so that we can proceed to get an IMF deal, because debt sustainability is a sine qua non for getting the IMF deal in the first place. And that's why we are where we are today. Let's not forget, the deadline is the end of the month, and this conversation should therefore proceed in that particular light. Professor Adair, you're welcome to UPfront.
Thank you.
Yes, Prof, it is perhaps a very long week of engagements and a couple of days that we'll sincerely be having a very big conversation on. But the latest happening I just announced, as we heard from Mr. Pebu, is that the finance minister says, I am willing to engage you on what to cut out of our budget so that we can accommodate your request for the exclusion of individual bondholders. Is this a step in the right direction?
First of all, I'm doubtful whether that was the finance minister's decision. The decision, if I understand, was that the two sides must look at what their petition, what can be done, and that it's not preempted by saying that he has agreed to their submissions, and that is where can we find the budgetary ways to cover it. I doubt. I think that is the main issue is for them to go and meet together and discuss further what should be whether all can be exempted or not, and that but I will leave that one for the outcome. But I think that
it's interesting, Prof. Yes, I mean, maybe I misunderstood Mr. Pebu, but it's the impression I got from him, and I saw clarity on that particular point. And because he said all that's left is almost fait accompli, leading to the announcement that's required here. That is why I am a bit, unclear in my mind about your very important clarification on this point.
Well, I must say that I was at the meeting and I'm wondering whether that was the conclusion. But I will leave that one to them. When they meet, it can come out whether that was an agreement or not. But I think that we are here not to talk about their specific meeting, but about the broader debt sustainability issue. So I think that I will leave the issue of what was his understanding of what transpired at the meeting.
I get your point. And now this is following a lot of controversy. And I mean, from where you sit, first, there was agitation from the people who are within the group of pensioners. So the labor groups forced government's hand, and government had to exclude the pension funds. Then individual bondholders are actually on board. Indeed, even banks, that group, the Association of Banks, had clearly indicated that in its current form, the domestic debt exchange program will not be in their interest, so they will not subscribe to it. That is how declarative their point was. We have heard from the Insurance Association equally taking a similar position like the banks. We have a couple of months to an IMF program, and that's so critical to our economy, we are told. How do we resolve these issues? Do you think that the various groups have legitimate concerns?
They have legitimate concerns, but together it cannot be legitimate. If everybody wants to be excluded, if everybody wants to have a special deal, then basically we will not meet the conditions. And the alternative is that we will have the free-for-all we experienced slightly in 2022, and everybody, whether you like it or not, can hold your bond when the value is zero. And you can easily, when we have said, God forbid, though, I'm just saying, because I don't want us to get the inflation, the way it's going, gets to 100%. If there's no agreement and there's a CD devaluation, about 30 cedis to $1 and the rest, and you cannot even, the government is not able to service the debt, we may hold a bond, but it will be a paperless or valueless bond. So I think that at the end of the day, and I think the government didn't start on a good note by all these engagements you have been proud to the announcement, but now at least they have come to the table. At the end of the day, I expect that there will be some compromises, and I have some that I would like to suggest as we go along. If you want me to do it now, go ahead.
I will come back to you in a second. Just give me a few minutes to also hear some preliminary comments from Mr. Tekpe on this conversation. Mr. Tekpe, is it a step in the right direction? Is the apparent concession of a sort, which now it's very much unclear, which we should be able to clarify in the course of the meetings to come, is it a step in the right direction? The conversation about whether or not we need to look into the budget and find a place to cut. You've been finance minister before. Budget putting together is a very big deal. Is this something that's likely to lead to a very successful negotiation?
Yeah, thank you very much. And on that point, I agree with Prof that this should have preceded, the consultative process was important and should have preceded the public announcement. Let me cite a precedent. When we issued the 3- and 5-year bonds to clear the single spine arrears between 2010 and 2011, and 2014, we came to a debt crunch. And what we did was for 3 months, of course, there was ESLA, if you recall. For 3 months, there was consultation, actually 4 months, with the Institute of Bankers, before we came out with the VRA restructure, if you remember, of the VRA debt. Similarly, there was some consultation in the background when we did the 2015 World Bank bond, guaranteed bond, which we also used partially to take off His Excellency before regime sovereign bond, and the rest was cleared with the sinking fund, including the balance which the current government use. Century is another example of broad consultation. In matters that touch the lives of people, of course we had Go and Takrady, such as which involved discussions with labor before we came out with a 3-year program of payment and eventually the COLA to recall. So consultation is always very important, and I'm glad that the consultative process, has started, it has value, because that is the forum where the technical people will explain the dire position of the economy, which has been considered today, and the point which Prof made, that either we all lose or we come to some compromise, and the economy will go down. And then I'll come back to that. Now, my second point on what has occurred is that we are coming around to austerity. Out of the 17 or 18 programs that we have done in the past, there isn't a single one of them in which expenditure cuts was not a major element. And I think this should tell us, probably as Ghanaians, the importance of, over budgeting, overspending, election mandates, which cannot be met. This is the main reason, budget overrun, that we often go into IMF programs. The reason we established the stabilization fund, and it's the reason, if we are going to borrow, we establish a sinking fund. If we are going to borrow, learn to pay. So I think the second important value for me is the fact that we have come to the point where we think from what the minister may have considered, that whether that's the appropriate forum, technical forum, and as the people mentioned, there were technical people there who know the budget and who make positive contribution. I know some of the names you mentioned. It's a welcome, and so eventually we ended up not avoiding austerity, which again has been on the card. The size of government, flagship programs, which were the reasons we were borrowing, using the budget as a means of our public sector wages, and the arrears, which includes NAPO, the flagship employment policy. So we've considered now the importance of austerity if we were avoiding it. But I have two concerns. What is it that we have agreed? Are we going to write the budget all over again? And this is a legal process. The budget has gone to Parliament. I didn't hear anything about Parliament. The budget has gone to Parliament. Parliament considered it in committee and in plenary and gave its approval. More importantly, Parliament has given us, an appropriation act. It was a bill that became law. So that budget can only be varied in very substantive terms. And I use advisory because obviously if you are reducing expenditure, you may not need a supplementary budget. And where you are doing a major thing which is tantamount changing elements of the IMF program, and I'll come to the IMF, then it means that, of course, it will be positive if it went in that direction, but I think that Parliament may have to be involved. And I recall when we decided to go to the IMF in 2015, if you recall, 2015, we used both the budget and the statement in Parliament, to seek confirmation of that august body, which is the only one, that can change, that can, impose taxes. And of course, if you trim the expenditure, it's not so much an issue. But the reason it's going to be an issue for parliamentarians is that, remember, there are social intervention, packages. And I heard Mr. Kivu mentioning capital. Remember that the capital expenditure is already crowded out, almost complete, and is dependent on debt by the wages and interest payments. We've been discussing this over the last 3 or 4 years. So, in fact, the government's own revenue does not cover expenditure. most of the capital, sorry, does not cover capital. And much of treaties, it doesn't cover adequately capital, it does not cover non-recurrent expenditure adequately, and it was not covering amortization because we're talking about interest. That is the debt repayment, which is why we are where we are, and we are doing a debt restructuring. So you see the extent to which Parliament has a role to play in all of this. Of course, revenue, I read
Okay.
in the GRA meeting this back. My final point is what is the context of the agreement against the background of the SL, that's the staff level agreement that we agree that we have, with the fund, of which the debt restructuring is a condition. Of course, if it's going to be very substantially, the fund is interested whether it still meets the requirements for going to the board, which is the reason we went to the individuals after they were excluded, after the pension, which is why it is important for everybody to come, to the table.
Okay.
So these are elements, which come up from the meeting that was held. Positive as it is, I think the Minister of Finance will have to.
I'm struggling now, Mr. Tekpe, to hear you. So maybe we'll fix that and bring you back on board. But let me move to Prof. Professor Ade, you had indicated that you had specific possible solutions to our current problem that we could explore. But let me start with that very clear question. Should individual bondholders be excluded? And if you really are up for the conversation we are now having, what should government cut back on to ensure that we can make room for the people we are discussing here?
Thank you very much. First of all, I believe that as a bloc, no group should be totally exempted, because it's like saying that when the fire is burning, some people should have an air condition. And therefore, I believe that if you take the 1.3 million individual or so bond holders, as I'm being told, about 90% of them, I call them survivor bond holders, they need it for their survival. And if you tamper with them, you are almost going to cause their death. And most of them are holding 5,000, 10,000, 50,000. My reading is that about 10,000 are very high wealth holders, and they might probably hold about 70+% of all the bonds. I don't think that they should be exempted from participating in rescuing the economy for the poor and the rich. And therefore, I think that, yes, there's a need for a certain threshold of individual bond holders. But I hope my friend, Honorable Tekwe, is not one of them. If he has 20 million, we shall include his 18 million and maybe 2 million. So I think that the discussion should be a threshold in which people really must be exempted, and the rest is not confiscated, but they must take part in the this type of restructuring. To your second question, my view is that there is room, and I agree with Honorable Tekwe. When people look at the budget figures, they think that the money is there, so they go and cut this capital budget. In fact, all the capital budget, I don't know the 27 million, how much can be implemented, because if the debt and now 30% increase in wages will absorb all revenue, they are actually going to depend upon the gratuity of others in order to be able to implement them. So nobody should be looking at the 27 million as if it is sitting there for it to be taken out so that we can exempt other people. But I agree with Honorable Tekwe and many who are saying that we must as a people and for the leadership to show that when they are calling everybody to tighten their belts, they are leading the way. And I still agree that this country doesn't have to have almost 86 plus ministers and how many ministries and supra ministries, including Jubilee House, becoming almost like the extra with 3 billion allocated to it. I think that even symbolically, there's a need for His Excellency the President to come up to show that we are in crisis time and the executive and the government is taking the lead in showing the way so that when they call for tightening of belts, people who cannot tighten their belts, when they see that some people are growing their tummies. Let me also say that in all these things, I've been disappointed by Parliament. This is the time they should have, in our country, it's so difficult for an NDC government to bring in some MPP people and vice versa. But Parliament, who are the representatives of the people by now, should have set up a high-powered academicians, practitioners, business people, politicians to be discussing this economy. What I see is as if, Kanoforiata, you are there, solve the problem. The sad part is his own NPP people say that you are the troublemaker. It's not, we are in a very serious national crisis, and I don't see the urgency among the leadership of this country at this moment.
Now, Prof, I was also coming to the point you made about what we should do going forward. You purposefully said we cannot exempt all individual bondholders. We should select and exempt those who will not survive with a debt exchange program. That's if I understood you properly.
Now, yes, by setting up a threshold, those below it must be exempted.
Now, the conversation had actually moved, and you were also talking about the difficulty which we may encounter looking at the capital expenditure and what to cut from there. But you're also calling for some level of admission or sort, if you like, or if you want to call it, some level of understanding that is shown by the executive that we are all in this together and we are equally making some sacrifices. The argument has been that we need collectively to at least make sure we do not increase capital expenditure by a peswa, revert to last year's own, and keep that particular budget, which was around 17 or so billion and not up to the 27 that we're talking about, which will make room for you to clear all individual bondholders. The other argument has been that you should be able to make sure that you reduce substantively, which is what you referenced, the ministers in the country, so that we will cut back on government expenditure from the office of the president and the other places. If what we understand is the direction given by the finance minister is anything to go by, do you suspect that by this indication alone, a lot more people will be invited to come and sit on the table to look at cost-cutting measures, or it might not be as easy as Mr. Tekpe points out?
It won't be easy. Let me tell you, the budget will cut itself down because I'm not challenging the Minister for Finance, neither was I part of the preparation of the budget, but I don't see how under these circumstances they are going to find 27 billion for capital expenditure. So that is the first place. So don't think that the 27 billion is sitting there as a pot, so cut it. So that's the first place. There's no money sitting there. They are going to look for money. They are going to find other means to. So, and in order to do so, it will be the mid-year budget review that will be solve it. So it's going to be difficult, but you can, of course, reduce expenditure in other areas But unfortunately, we have just given 30% increase in salaries, which will compromise the ability to reduce the recurrent budget. And so we are in the situation that are, as Honorable said, there are only two major things that takes all our revenue: remuneration and that of debt service. So by this increase, you have increased that portion. And that will mean that even the debt reduction becomes even more urgent. And of course, if they can reduce the expenditure of government, which it will not be a significant one, but I think that it will be very symbolic and important to mobilize Ghanaians behind this venture that we are undertaking, domestic debt exchange program.
Now, there were indications that even treasury bills were not off the table, and they're also possibly being considered in this conversation because of the other alternatives that were available to government. Do you think by this indication from the Finance Ministry, we have absolute confidence that treasury bills will never be touched?
That is one of the advantages to be a freelance economist, not even a full-time lecturer now. I think that if treasury bills are mishandled, then the government's avenue, because nobody's going to buy bonds now, to raise any extra budgetary money will almost be shut down. So I don't see treasury bills being roped in like the rest. But on the personal level, I personally think that they should forget about this inflation targeting and continually raising the Bank of Ghana rates. We should really give treasury bills, if not the old ones, new ones, a real haircut. I don't think that going to 35%, so that as long as you borrow in a year, you are paying in interest 1/3, more than 1/3 of what you have borrowed, will soon land us, even when we go through this, into another trouble. So I don't think that treasury bills should be included generally, but the rate of interest on treasury bills as we go forward have to be looked at.
Now, let me bring Mr. Tekpe into the conversation. And Mr. Tekpe, the point you were making, and now I'll need to ask you directly, that some of you have been demanding expenditure touches. You were insisting that we should cut back on expenditure. Some other people have actually pointed out. Now, it appears that conversation is coming home. Specifically, what should be removed from the current budget to make sure that we can accommodate the changes people are demanding to the domestic debt exchange?
Yeah, thank you very much. In order that it does not sound like pontificating, particularly since I occupied that position, let me remind you that in 2015, 2016, the then administration was going to build 200 e-schools, and almost every district was going to have a hospital, and then continue, with the school under trees. You recall that even in the heat of the electioneering, the then president came out and said those flagship programs were going to be partially suspended, and instead of attempting to complete even 150 out of 200 schools, we were going to do less than 100. And then in 2017, if the recovery of crude oil price as it happened, and then also 10 fields Sankofa came on stream, then, we would go back, to them. That is a tough political, decision that has to be made. So the first one is we all know, and I have been on record since 2017. And so there's, if there's any political damage to my good self, I've said it already, that free SHS in its unfettered form was never going to be sustainable since 2017. We have to look at it. Well, what is the practical situation now? We know that there is no single student who goes to school today without parents, supplementing, their income substantially, provisions. And those who are left out are the very poor people, poor, students, low income, let me use that, political correct expression. Once, they are the ones whose kids are suffering. Of course, they would paddle through, but then the substitute is bursary scholarships for the bright ones and everything. And then the expansion, which is the rationale, for the day schools. Of course, the size of government has been mentioned. And again, recall that going into the 2015, budget, the then administration, of course, with a lower size, also, reduced the expenditures, for government appointees. Obviously, we were into single spine and we had already gone into an agreement with labor in terms of COLA and in terms of spreading, the arrears over a period of 3 years into 2015, 2016. So these are precedents, and that's the basis on which I've said that, there is no fund program in which either of government's own initiative or we are forced, not to trim expenditure. One which has been announced in the budget already is the freezing, of the net freeze on employment into the public service, which was a big issue, if you remember when the ECF, was done. So, Raymond, these are examples, from our history. Of course, you end up putting in place cushions like PAMSCAD and the rest, to protect, the vulnerable. LEAP and others, are then enhanced. And the fund, luckily, it's not the fund that we used to know, but the fund itself, even in the 2021 Article 4, has, indicated that government needs to do more, even within context of COVID, should have done more in terms of, social intervention. Raymond, should we be looking at T-bills or not? I'd like to look at the issue in a broader context. In fact, we should be mindful of two facts. If we undermine the financial sector, we are also undermining the financing of the very 2023 budget. Remember, the 2023 budget has an element of borrowing. What has been frozen is, past anything in excess of that borrowing, and then what is under discussion is the up to 2022, 2021 bonds that were issued. And so, including treasury bills, as hard as it would be, would shake confidence, or it's likely to shake confidence in the financial. Now, the second reason why this is going to be really tough is that we do not have access to the external markets, as you know already.
Yeah.
We will stop going to the external markets, apart from bilaterals, that is development partners, and the multilaterals, IMF, World Bank, and the rest. We still need to borrow. And so even as we speak about bonds, and even as we speak about treasury bills, the government is going to continue borrowing to finance, the budget. Of course, Bank of Ghana has depleted its reserves, and I'm afraid my senior Prof. Ade, I'm afraid BOG would have to continue employing the tools at its disposal, including interest rates, because if you are tottering towards a situation where you have depleted your reserves, how is BOG going to come in, or how are we going to finance if the domestic market also becomes shaky? Prints, currency, which is what we had gone through in the 70s and 80s, I believe, Prof, is very, being a more than a senior, will recall those incidents. So we have precedents which should guide us and why we should be careful. Now, in fact, we have to, it is for these reasons that we have to consult as quickly as possible and enter into an IMF program in order that, the deterioration would not worsen.
Now, the conversation about what to include and what will include, we were told that the banks had also rejected the debt exchange program in its current form. Do you think that this meeting they are going to hold with government is likely to get the banks coming on board now? And how serious is the bank's position to the entire program and the credibility it presents? Yeah,
Look,
Mr. Teke.
negotiation is always a difficult one. We are starting from a situation where there was virtually no consultation. You remember, we have a precedent with haircuts, which may have, probably prompted the government that this was going to be easy. And that precedent, if you recall, years back, it was alleged, and some say that it's on record, that contractors were being paid net of a haircut, through some commercial banks, right? And of course, they were desperate for the payment, despite ESLA, which was to pay the contractors. Some of them accepted, and some others rejected it. This should tell us that when we push people to the wall, there would always be, resistance. So if that was what, informed the decision to virtually go fait accompli with that scenario, it's not going to work. Now, we have always had wage negotiation is what? It's never been easy. Because, of course, you have inflation and you have, labor which is representing workers. And yes, even when you sit on the other side of the table, the economic reality, but we are a developing country. We have always found a way. Just as whether it's conclusive or not, I'm told we are doing 30-35%, which Prof alluded to, not the 50 or 55, which was, requested. Remember, I said the same thing, the demand, for payment of all single spine arrears, we came down, we negotiated hard, COLA and all those things. So I think we already have the tradition of sitting across the table. I mentioned ESLA. Of course, the banks were not pleased at the time, with, the fact that there was going to be some haircut, and then but then the difference then is that we had ESLA inflows, and that's one of the mistakes we made by collateralizing ESLA. If we had gone ahead and used the flows to pay as we started with VRA, we would probably not be where we are, but we are where we are now. Let me make 2 points. Yes, I did mention the role of Parliament. Prof has mentioned it. The Finance Committee is technical. Usually the people who go on the Finance Committee have some technical background. Of course, you have generalists because you cannot have only experts on it. It's supposed to be in committee, look at things dispassionately, and you will see that some issues have been coming. Of course, you can have minority statements, and the rest. But I'm saying that we have experiences with these issues already, and I did mention that to the extent that the Parliament the budget has been approved already by Parliament, we would have to go back to Parliament, either in a media review, as Prof mentioned, or as in 2015, in a special statement to Parliament. But I would hope that before we go to Parliament, we would have clarity on all the issues. Because remember, the changes that we are proposing to make, and of course, we have the latitude to do it, must satisfy the staff level agreement in order that, the IMF will go to the board and give us that respite, that we need. Finally, let me also mention, Raymond, that we do not have much information on how well the external bond restructuring and negotiations are going, and a committee was formed by those creditors. Obviously, with the ratings agencies, they must be watching what is going on, right? And so I think the faster we put this behind us, the better for the country.
I get you, but
and I
need to bring Prof in. Sorry, I need to bring Prof in now, if you can hear me, Mr. Tekpe. And Professor Stephen Ade, the question I'm asking is that we not only have a problem with individual bondholders, we also have a problem with the banks. And the Association of Banks had actually issued a statement indicating that they had rejected this and that nobody should sign on until they're able to get clarity and some understanding of what should be done properly. And the very issues favorable to them are considered. Is that something that is likely to happen, banks exclusion?
Let me say that in negotiation, people will have to show that they are having strong positions vis-a-vis their constituency. But I expect that there would be an agreement between the government and the banks. For example, I think that there's a midway whereby For example, you cannot have 0% for 2023. The government will eventually have probably given to about 5%, and then 7.5% the following year, and then so there will be an accommodation. And I think that the banks know that it's in their interest because the financial institutions are always the first to be hit when there's a panic in the system. So to be honest, I'm expecting that by the 31st, the banks and the government will have come to some conclusion. I expect that even the pension funds will come to the table and discuss and tweet whatever they have agreed with the government. I expect that the individual bondholders will come through. I personally think that when they insert in the threshold, you find out that 90% of their constituencies will be taken care of, and the rest are likely to keep quiet. But whatever it is, I think that people should not think that here is the government and here is everybody else. We will be in serious trouble if we are not able to catalyze an IMF program. And Honorable Tekwe talk about the externals. The externals will not make a move, I think, unless the domestic debt exchange program is concluded and the IMF, before they will sit down and come out with a conclusion. So it's unfortunate what we do domestically will be precedent or as a precondition to come into terms with external creditors. But at the end of the day, sometimes the government makes a statement and I laugh. They said that, all this is voluntary, but it's a compulsory voluntary. If you don't participate, if we don't come to some accommodation, we shall all sing together.
It's an interesting point that's also be raised about this. But the very final thoughts, gentlemen, I'm taking from you is now you talked about how we go forward from here. And Prof, you mentioned your expectations from the banks straight down to even the pension funds you dragged into this conversation. Do you expect that all of this can be concluded before the 31st? Some are demanding a further extension of that particular deadline. But do you think, Mr. Tekwe first, that this can be concluded in a minute before 31st?
Well, I think that this is where the education and the consultation has to be intensified, because what is it that is important to reaching an agreement by the end of the month? It is the very IMF program that would bring respite to the economy. And if it will mean sleepless nights, I have been in negotiations, when we're talking to the banks, we start about 5 p.m. because, of course, the managing directors, they are technical people, and we have technical committees, as we are talking about now, coming in at 5:30, and sometimes up to 11 p.m. We are still, behind the desk negotiating. I don't think this is new to any group in Ghana. So I think that is something, it's a target, a goal that we have to set in the interest of not collapsing the economy. The banks have a dual role to play. Remember, they are intermediaries for those who have deposited, but even in terms of their own money, remember that a proportion has to be held in government bonds. So are the pensioners. We are not going to change this law, and therefore we should find a solution in order that, as I said, we do not undermine the whole financial architecture, which has gone through one major restructuring, whatever I think of it or not. And as we speak, there are depositors who have not been paid from that period. And so we cannot continue shaking, the financial sector, which will make the work of Bank of Ghana very and extremely, difficult. Because then it will be very, very difficult to resolve.
Yeah, Prof. Extension.
I think that there shouldn't be any extension because, the IMF committee will be meeting in March. If we slip March, it's going to have to wait for the spring, and we will be in dire trouble. So it's not a matter of whether we have to conclude it by the 31st so that we can go in February to present a position to the IMF. So we don't have the luxury. And the people must know that it is not a matter of what we agree with the government. Other than that, something will have to be imposed. And I think that now that there's a window for discussion, let them take advantage of it and come to a conclusion by 31st.
I am grateful to you, gentlemen, for joining us on Upfront. Ladies and gentlemen, that's where we are. Today's edition of Upfront. You just heard that particular engagement with the Finance Ministry and the outcome from the very gentlemen that be joining this conversation. Professor Stephen Adair and Finance Minister, former Secretary, thank you once again for joining us.